Hey Presto, Gavin here. Welcome to episode 96 of the Business Mastermind podcast. First and foremost, I hope you and your family are safe and well, and you are starting to adapt to, if that such a thing is possible, to the world that we find ourselves currently in. You may have probably heard, listening to this podcast previously, that I came out with a guide that shared 8 steps that you should do, such as look after your employees, secure your cash flow, ascertain your supply chain, talk to your customers, point around mindset and the importance around mindset, building a community, check the messaging of your marketing, and so on. If you've not yet downloaded that guide, Keep Your Boat Afloat, Business Survival Guide for COVID-19 times, please do so. I've had great feedback, thank you very much, and some fantastic calls with business owners that need some help, or business owners giving me feedback on the guide. So it's called Keep Your Boat Afloat, Business Survival Guide for COVID-19 times. And it's available bit.ly/keep your boat afloat. bit.ly/keep your boat afloat. I want to progress and develop that thinking a stage now. So first of all, the first thing I want you to be thinking about now, beyond those 8 points in that guide, is to check in about how you're feeling, because it is an emotional roller coaster. And one of the conversations I had with Daniel and the mini-series of Keep Your Boat Afloat, the podcast mini-series, was with Daniel Tolston. He talked about, effectively, we're having a grief response, the emotional sort of change curve, the grief curve from the loss of the future that we hoped we were going for. And for those that you don't know, that goes from sort of denial through to anger, blame, down into despondence, depression, ambivalence, then to acceptance, and then back up to hope. And so you need to check in about where you are on that cycle, and we'll all move backwards and forwards across that. At times over the last 4 weeks, I've been through a whole range of those emotions, both sharing that journey with my clients, but also experiencing it for me and my family and my own business. And sometimes I think I've got to the point of acceptance and hope, and then sometimes find myself going back to some areas of despondence. And it's natural. We've got to be kind to ourselves in knowing that emotional journey is a standard. It's a natural process. But I want you to check into how you're feeling with a focus on, how do I get myself to acceptance sooner? How do I get myself to hope sooner? And one of the things you can do to get yourself to acceptance and hope quicker is the actions that you'll take now with your mindset and your vision and sight on recovery, rebooting your business, rebounding from the setback. So I really want you to be thinking about what are the actions, what are the things you can start to be doing now to rebound, to reset, to recover your business going forward. So firstly, after checking into how you're feeling and start to focus on the positives, I think the mirror is being held up to us all at the moment, both in terms of our business, how it operates, any cash buffers you may or may not have had in your business, how cash buffers you may have had in your personal finances. And I think we need to look hard in the mirror and take on board the lessons. Conduct with yourself or with the key members of your team, conduct a lessons learned activity where you go through when you say, okay, what have we learned from this? What would be different, and what could we put different in place going forward? Let's be real. Until a vaccine is produced, then come the autumn, come the winter, we may find ourselves with a resurgence, highly likely to find ourselves with a resurgence of coronavirus cases, and we may find ourselves back in some kind of a lockdown, or at the very least social distancing. So you may have a window of opportunity over several months with which to put things in place to make it an easier flip back into remote working again. So, but what are your lessons learned? Look into that mirror, be critical, self-evaluating around what could we have done differently, what would we have to put in place to improve it going forward, and also what opportunities are there that are coming out the other side. Often we get asked, don't we, if you had a blank piece of paper, what would you do? Well, for some people, they really do have a blank piece of paper for their business right now. And is this the opportunity for you to change the game? I've had conversations over the last few days with businesses that have done a really successful pivot from a business based on physical meetings, physical presence and clinics to an online solution, and complete remote business. Phenomenal, Herculaneum amount of effort that's gone in a short period of time to shift that business, and they're now back into generating revenue, and it's looking very, very positive for them. But other businesses haven't been able to pivot quite so easily, quite so quickly. So look, what's worked with a remote working, what hasn't, what new systems have you been using, what have you found that's been real benefits, and where are the efficiencies that you could continue to have in your business going forward. And if you, for example, have got a higher degree of remote working and that's been successful to the point that you think that will be continuing, what infrastructure do you need to have in place going forward so that that can carry on? And secondly, what fixed costs can you over time reduce because you don't need as much office space, for example? I think one thing that we would be beneficial for us to do going forward is seeing where, as a matter of strategic sort of principle, we looked at how do we shift more things that currently are under a fixed cost category into a variable cost category, i.e. fixed cost, your rent, your mortgage on your building, your premises, or your rent and lease on your building and premises, you have to pay that in, month out. Variable may be the amount of meeting room space you hire or the amount of co-working space that you hire on a month basis that you can flex up and down in line with needs. So use this opportunity, a blank sheet of paper, to reassess how could you have more of a variable cost element, high proportion of your cost base being variable as opposed to fixed cost. Bring in outside brains. One of the challenges that we're all going through now is it's not just a demanding time on our energy and our creativity. We'll be getting decision fatigue for a number of people. It's a hell of an emotional journey, and the adaptation of working at home and some of the challenges, if you've got young children around homeschooling, for example, is huge. Being cooped up in the same house, same property with your nearest and dearest for such a length of time, some might see it as a joy, some might see it as a challenge, to say the least. So one of the things that came out of China's lockdown was a spike in pregnancies and a spike in divorce applications. So I know it's just a reality of that journey of being all cooped up, I guess, together in a short period, for a short and intense period of time in a small space. So back to my point about virtual input, as in external advisors, external sort of board members, non-execs, consultants, coaches, whatever, to come in and run like a virtual brainstorming, business strategic planning, virtual board planning session around how we're going to come back from this. I think you need to have a reboot. You will need to have a reboot with your teams. They've had to do this sudden shift to working from home, and now they're going to need to work back in back in an environment with whichever format that you decide. Your supply chain needs remobilizing. That's not going to take place overnight. The lockdown is lifted, and then you walk into the place of work the first day, the Monday morning, and you open the doors and you go, great, right, come on, back, crack on. Well, your supply chain might not be there. The restaurant that opens, delighted to be able to get an influx of customers, doesn't even know whether potatoes have been pulled out of the ground by the farmer in the last 2 months, 3 months. So I'd encourage you to start to be thinking deep into your supply chain and starting to have conversations into your supply chain around what are the activities that we need to be doing to try and mobilize, to try and prime the pump. There is someone using an analogy like there's been an accident on the motorway is being closed, the freeway's being closed, and all the traffic's backed up. And once the accident is cleared, then the ways, it takes time for that traffic to start moving again. Well, I think it's worse than even that. All the cars that were sat there, all the vehicles that were sat there, have burnt all the fuel in the tanks with their onboard air conditioning or their onboard heaters to keep warm or keep cool during this period of time. So they're all out of fuel. So you've got to resupply every single one of those vehicles so they can even start to move again. And but the analogy goes on when everybody gets out of the car and pushes them over to the side. Those that have some fuel can start to move. we can come up with creative solutions. And using that analogy, I would like you to think into your supply chain and what can you do with teams of people, just like on a motorway where everybody piled up in a big traffic jam could push cars over to one side so some could start moving until you got refueled. How could you take that analogy into your supply chain and start to trigger some of the activity that can help everybody get back moving again, trading with their businesses? Refocus on, rezone in on, refocus on who is your customer avatar. It's who needs your help as a business in terms of its product or service most right now. What are their pains? What are their needs? How can you help them? How can you help serve those? You've heard me say in the conversation with Kelly Teasdale in one of the other Keep Your Boat Afloat sort of mini-series, Kelly's point is build brand equity now with your marketing. Seek less about selling, more about building that brand equity. So I'd encourage you to carry on to doing that, to building a sense of community. But my main message really for you through this Hey Presto is twofold. Check in on how you're feeling and make sure that you're focusing on the things that you can be doing in order to be able to move into acceptance and hope in that change curve. And secondly, get outside input to the thought process. How do we remobilize? How do we get our business moving again? What are the things that we can do several levels into our supply chain to stimulate that thought? Now, maybe some people in your supply chain are still in the position of, I'm at home, this is crap. Whereas if you're being proactive and starting to get them to think about the future, now this lockdown in the UK, some thinking, is it going to be in place until the end of May? I think that's probably a reasonable assumption. But you can start the thought process that if we are able to sort of go out of our homes again by early June, what needs to be happening now, what can be happening now within the restrictions of the lockdown to help to facilitate as quicker return to trade, to flowing of cash within our businesses. Most of all, be kind to yourself through this period. Make sure that you're looking after your physical fitness. Make sure you're keeping yourself hydrated. Hopefully, without a commute, you may be catching up on some sleep. I know it's been a good while since I've managed to achieve 8 hours in a night of sleep. So that's been one advantage of not having early commutes. But I would really encourage you to start to be shifting your thinking to how do we remobilize the business? How do we remobilize the team, the supply chain, and get cash flowing again? Listen out for future episodes, I beg your pardon. I've got some other good interviews lined up, in almost like a season 2 of Keep Your Boat Afloat for the Business Mastermind podcast. Take care.